just out of curiosity, is there anybody here that does not currently practice with ozone therapy that's looking to get into it and is trying to understand the compliance side?
Myself.
Okay. And what kind of practice do you have?
I have a mobile urgent care practice, and I've seen what ozone has done for some of my patients, and also for my daughter who has MS, has had very, very effective therapy.
Awesome.
I'm doing ozone injections as a chiropractor, sub-Q and intramuscular, but I'm bringing on a nurse practitioner shortly, and with the idea of potentially adding IV nutrition and hopefully ozone. So,
okay. What state are you in that you can do injections?
Utah.
Okay, perfect.
You were out at our initial foray into the homeopathic and ozone injection training.
Yeah, that was right before the COVID mess. I remember that pretty distinctly. And I remember I was fasting that whole time. So I was like dying as we're doing this like 3-day thing. And for some reason I thought like, well, I'm traveling, it's a good time to do a 3 or 4 day fast.
Wow.
But that's not the case. Just speaking from experience. So cool. Well, I'll get started on my slide set, but basically what I'm going to run through is, because I think these things kind of run in tandem from your guys' perspective. It's like, hey, what is the risk of this therapy? Say we did, scale it up, 10,000 treatments. What's my risk? What's my skin in the game with that? What's my liability? So I'm going to be covering kind of the safety side of it, and spoiler alert, super safe, but I'm going to explain it in more depth and what that means in research and all that good stuff. And then from there, I'll have a ton of resources. I have a ton of resources on ozone therapy itself, the safety, how it works, the biochemistry. So if you guys after this meeting have more questions, please just contact me, because I would be happy to give more information. This is by no means meant to be comprehensive on the safety of ozone therapy. It's more to just make you aware of some of the different elements out there and give you an opportunity to be able to, oh, well, I want to understand this more, so I'm going to put my question in that direction. And then Dr. Boonder is going to come on and talk more about compliance. What are we doing from a compliance standpoint? What about the FDA? What about the FTC? So some of these different elements, he's going to come in and speak on that and make sense of it for you guys. So I'm going to do a screen share, and then we'll get started. And if you guys have questions throughout, just start dropping them in the chat. And we'll be able to take and use those in our Q&A session. I did forget to mention that. We're going to have a Q&A afterwards, so it'll be more dialogue. First part is just kind of the presentation. So can you see my screen, Christy? Take that as a yes.
Yes, you're good. We see it.
Okay, perfect. So I'm not getting into the efficacy portion, right? We're just talking about safety. So this is assuming you have some knowledge about the efficacy of ozone therapy. There's not really enough time to get into that today. But with ozone therapy, there's 5 basic elements that I'm personally looking at to inform my decision about the safety of ozone therapy. The first is that the biochemistry is well established. We've been studying it for the past 60 years. We understand how it works within the body, and I'm going to go in these in more depth. Secondly, it's approved in over 20 countries. There's an interesting story too, where it did make it through FDA safety standards, despite some of their statements on it currently. Then clinical reports, fourth, over 2,000 medical studies done on ozone therapy, and those range, and I'll kind of cover that. And then fifth, there's over 10 million treatments done with ozone therapy per year within the United States and Canada, which is pretty crazy. And that's including all practices. So that's dental, regenerative injections, aesthetics, IVs, home use. So it is looking at kind of a broad range of applications, and ideally you're digging down into one, but I feel like that lends to some of the credibility of the safety there. So I have that on there. So biochemistry is well studied. We know the mechanisms of action. We know how ozone therapy works in the body, but there's a key distinguishment between the lungs, which is how most people, what they know about ozone therapy is they know you can't breathe it. They know about it as a pollutant. Like in LA, they'll say the ozone levels are such and such today. And they equate that to be a bad thing, because when you breathe in ozone, it oxidizes lung tissue. And the reason for that is there's no antioxidant buffering system there. Whereas if we put it into the blood, into other parts of the body, the ears, there's an antioxidant buffering system that it interacts with, and it's not directly interacting with the cells. It's interacting with the antioxidant buffering system. And nobody really argues about ozone in the lungs, whether you're an ozone therapist or you're, don't know much about it and you're like, hey, this is not a good thing. There's just this huge misnomer about it because they take this idea of pollution or the ability to breathe it and they apply it to all ozone applications without really any knowledge about ozone therapy itself. I've yet to find somebody that's well educated in ozone therapy that's a detractor of it. Usually it's people who are talking on half truths, or they grab somebody who's making ridiculous claims with it, like I'm curing cancer and AIDS and all this stuff with like a 90% efficacy in ozone therapy. And then they'll look at that person and it's like, yeah, obviously that's wrong. But usually it's a misnomer. They just don't understand the elements of ozone therapy. And although you can't breathe it into the lungs, it can be used in other parts of the body. So a couple of kind of good review studies that I have here. I think one is by Dr. Lamberto Ray, who is a biochemist out of Italy and a researcher and a professor. He covered a review called The Biological and Clinical Effects of Ozone as Ozone Therapy, a Future in Medicine. And then one of the staple reviews on ozone therapy safety is it true that ozone is always toxic? The End of a Dogma. And this is a little bit older. I mean, both of these are, but they really laid a foundation for ozone therapy. And the other one there, is it true that ozone is always toxic? Toxic is by Dr. Bacci, who is considered the father of ozone therapy. So nobody argues that about the lungs. We all know that it's bad to have ozone into the lungs. Now you can smell small amounts. It's one of the most detectable molecules that we know of at 5 parts per million. So that means at very minute amounts, you're actually able to detect and smell ozone gas. But even OSHA has like an allowable level of ozone that you can have in the room, you can have in the air, and 5 parts per million is way below that. So you can actually smell it way before it is a problem for breathing it. And it's usually like breathing it in large doses, like you're inhaling, you're in a room where an ozone generator is constantly running for prolonged periods of time. So that's primarily where the ozone comes in, is the prolonged exposure to it. But as far as like when we're applying it into the blood or into the other parts of the body, there's one key difference, and that is the antioxidants. So this is just a molecule of glutathione that I threw on here, but the antioxidants in the systems are the ones that quench the ozone gas. So essentially we apply the ozone gas, let's say, into the blood. It interacts instantaneously with the antioxidants. So within a millisecond, you can actually detect no more ozone in the body. But what that does is that stimulates a chain reaction, a cascade effect that's beneficial to the body. And this is another paper that was written it goes over the mechanisms of action involved in ozone therapy as healing induced via a mild oxidative stress. So what we're doing is we're actually inducing a mild acute oxidative stress. So what does that sound similar to? Well, that's ice baths, that's exercise, that's sauna, that's a lot of different things that we do. But there are useful forms of oxidative stress, and there are bad forms of oxidative stress. The useful forms of oxidative stress are the healthy things that we know, like the exercise. And what that does is that stimulates the NRF2 pathway, which in turn creates an upregulation of antioxidant enzymes. And through that, we actually have a mitigation of oxidative stress. So if you exercise, if you do ozone therapy, you're actually increasing your antioxidant potential and mitigating the chronic oxidative stress, which is the bad version. That's the version that is a cyclical pattern that as we get more reactive oxygen species, more free radicals, it perpetuates more of them and it spirals out of control. And one of the leading theories on oxidative stress, chronic oxidative stress, is that it is the leading cause of aging and disease. So as we get older, as we get more sick, we have more oxidative stress. But there are things that can help our body to combat that, ozone therapy being one of them. And that's what this slide down here in the right-hand corner is showing. So you see on the left upper-hand corner that mild oxidative stress, NRF2 stimulation, you go down to the bottom, antioxidant upregulation, and then antioxidant protection, which leads to mitigating of oxidative stress. So when we induce mild acute oxidative stress, what are we activating? So what is this actually doing that's beneficial? Well, it's signaling. So free radicals are actually signaling molecules, and we have to have them. We need them. They stimulate a lot of the body to do what it's supposed to do. So they're responsible for many functions that happen within the body. So at its base, ozone therapy is signaling or stimulating the body that allows it to take an autocorrective action. And here you can see some of the things that it's working with. So we take ozone, we put it into the blood, we get reactive oxygen species, we get lipid peroxides. And again, we kind of demonize those things, but they are necessary for the body because they are the signaling molecules. It's just the excess of them that is bad, that starts to throw wrenches in the system, that starts to break down cells and that kind of thing. But when we have them in moderation, it's exactly what we need. And those target a number of pathways from there. And that's kind of the autocorrective process that ozone therapy goes through. So that's just to kind of give a brief overview on really what ozone therapy is doing and why it's safe to apply, like into the blood or into the rectum, into the vagina, into the ears. All the different parts of the body that have antioxidant buffering systems are able to quench ozone gas. It doesn't interact directly with the cells there, but the antioxidants. So that's the big takeaway from that. And that explains why we can use ozone gas. And from there, it's approved in over 20 countries. There's over 60 medical organizations dedicated to ozone therapy and over 100,000 ozone therapists worldwide. Now, that in and of itself is not like a statement about the safety of ozone therapy. But what I'm looking at with this is that it's widely used. There's a lot of therapies done. There's people that are dedicated to this. So it contributes to an element of social proof, although I'm not extracting in this slide specific data from that. That's telling me like, hey, this is around. It's been around for a long time. And there's people using it with utmost safety. Interestingly, there was a company called Vasogen who actually made it through phases 1 and 2 of FDA trials. So the FDA has a process of getting FDA approval at stages 1, 2, and 3. Stages 1 and 2 are looking at safety and efficacy. Stage 3 is like, is it working for the specific indication? There's more to it than that, but are we looking at the specific indication? Is it helping with that? So what happened with Vasogen is there was these essentially doctor scientists who said, hey, we want to raise money so that we can put ozone therapy through the FDA. And so they needed a lot of investors, right? Because it's very, very expensive to get through the FDA process. So they bring on investors and the investors say, great, you want to put this through FDA approval and get it approved. Well, we need to make our money back. So we need to go after like the biggest, most hairy, most audacious thing that we can. So they chose chronic heart failure stage 3, because what that meant in their mind is if we can get it through FDA and show a beneficial effect to chronic heart failure stage 3, preferably reversing some of the damage, then we're going to make a ton of money. That 225 million is going to turn into 20 billion. So pretty big deal. But what ended up happening, they spent $225 million in research. They got through phases 1 and 2, which is the FDA saying, yes, ozone therapy works. Yes, ozone therapy is safe. When they got to the indication that they were looking at and produced some of the data around that, they found that it didn't really help with chronic heart failure stage 3 because a lot of damage has already been done to the heart and it does not reverse that. So they brought that back to the investors and the investors say, wait, you're telling me that I can't get all my money back out of this? And so everybody pulls their funds and then the whole thing folds. If they really wanted to, though, they would have made it through stage 3 of FDA approval. It was a fact of money that all the investors pulled out that they no longer had access to be able to push it through the FDA. So I find it really interesting because the FDA actually says ozone is a toxic gas. On the same note, they said ozone therapy is safe and effective. So, well, which is it? I guess it depends on the day you ask them, but kind of all over the place. And it makes sense. Like the FDA doesn't want to regulate something that they just don't have a lot of interest in. It's easier for them to say, hey, don't mess with this thing or don't bother with it. It doesn't work. Than to say, yeah, it works, but now we need to regulate the whole market on that. So it kind of makes sense from an incentive standpoint on their side of things. As far as clinical reports, this comes from the International Scientific Committee of Ozone Therapy, which is probably the most credible organization that exists on ozone therapy. It's made of a ton of researchers, scientists, people who have been working with it for a long time. Dr. Veliobaci was a part of this organization, and it's been around for a long time. So they did an assessment on over 300,000 IV treatments, specifically IV. And they found an adverse event rate of every 6 in 100,000, which is, if you know, that's extremely low. That's lower than the use of aspirin. And usually that adverse event was related to the use of heparin, the anticoagulant. So ozone, as far as what they found, just ridiculously safe when applied well. So over 2,000 medical studies have been done on ozone therapy. I would say this is another credibility standpoint. And the thing that really sticks out to me with this is that this is not coming from one group or two groups or three groups. This is coming from multiple groups across the world that have more or less been isolated from one another, which essentially means that we are replicating the science of ozone therapy across these independent groups. And what does that mean? It means it's scientific if you can replicate something. So that's the biggest thing that speaks out to me with this. But from that, and within these studies, I would say like there's a range of credibility. On one side, you have doctors working in their office. Hey, I treated 5 patients. This is what I did. This is what I observed. And this is what happened. On the other side, you have double-blind placebos. You have some of the Bayesian stuff, the phase 1 and 2 clinical trials. You have all sorts of stuff. So there is a range of credibility on these studies. But I think the thing that really sticks out to me personally and speaks loudly is the independent groups isolated from one another reaching the same conclusions, which is ozone therapy is safe and non-toxic. And cherry on top, I would say, is over 10 million treatments done per year with ozone in the USA and Canada.
Wow.
And I actually had the chance to talk with an FDA agent about ozone therapy, or he was retired rather, but he looked into for me, like how many complaints have actually been filed on ozone therapy. And so we had our conversation, and he did a little bit of research before and kind of had that ready, but he asked me, how many treatments do you think are done in the USA per year? And I said, based off my best guess, I've been, working in this industry in some capacity for 15 years, and I kind of know a decent amount about it. It might not be 100% accurate, but I think it's in excess of 10 million. And I'm not exaggerating this either. I think that's a pretty accurate number, a pretty safe number to go with. But I said, I think it's over 10 million. And he was just kind of blown away because he's like, there's only been 4 complaints to the FDA in the last 30 years. So you can kind of do the math there. I mean, there was definitely less treatments done 10 years ago and 10 years before that. But the fact is that we've done tens of millions of treatments with ozone therapy with 4 complaints in the last 30 years. So pretty phenomenal in terms of safety, I would say. All right, but I did want to bring up there is a condemned ozone method. This is called DIV. This is not me condemning it. This is condemned by the International Scientific Committee of Ozone Therapy, AAOT. Just to be clear, this isn't coming from me. So I have really no opinion on if you guys want to do it, that's your volition, but I just want to talk on it. So the thing with DIV is I would say, well, let me just go into this. DIV is accountable for most issues associated with ozone therapy because people get anxiety, they get chest tightness, you can burn up veins. So it's very easy to do wrongly. And it's essentially taking the ozone oxygen mixture and putting that directly into the vein. It's not a widely used method, but it's one method with regular adverse events due to putting gas directly into the veins. All the scientific organizations have condemned it as a practice. I'm not saying that there are not smaller organizations that exist with 2, 3, 4 people that are good with it, but all the big ones that have, lots of researchers, organizations involved with what they're doing have condemned it. But this doesn't really have any advantage over just taking the blood out, ozonating it, and putting it back in. And the problem is solved, but just by doing that. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because you might look up stuff on ozone therapy and find some issues with it here and there, but check and see if it's related to this, because more often than not it is. And I think, even this seems to be relatively safe. I know there's thousands and thousands of treatments done with it. Like, what was her name? Dr. Hannah. I can't pronounce her last name, but she spoke at a conference I was at recently, and this is all she does. If I go to that doctor and I get DIV, yeah, she's done it a ton of times. She knows how to do it. I would feel comfortable doing it, but I'm training people on this stuff. I'm showing them about ozone therapy. I'm trying to raise the credibility of it. Eventually, I'm trying to get it through the FDA. I have a lot that I'm trying to do with this. And this is one of the few things that I I perceive as I could not scale this up to 100,000 clinics and have reliable, safe results with ozone therapy. Somebody's going to do it wrong. It's not about the 999 that do it right. It's about the one person that does it wrong. So I want the things that are most likely to be 1,100% of the time it's done safely and there's not issues with it. And DIV is outside of those parameters for me. So that's why I have the position I do, because I think we can reach more people and help more people and, you know, have doctors with their own clinics and all sorts of good stuff if we just avoid it. So how to be fail safe. Do this and even a clown couldn't mess it up. So this is saying, like, how do you stay safe with ozone therapy? Just kind of bullet points. The biggest thing is don't give heparin to contraindicated patients already on blood thinners, anticoagulants, all the kind of basic stuff with heparin and that kind of thing. Then from there, stay within the recommended dosing ranges. There are dosing windows for ozone therapy set forth by the International Scientific Committee of Ozone Therapy. That's what our protocols are created from. That's what we train on, and that's what we show people. So stay within those ranges because they exist for a reason. Essentially, if we were to say ozonate blood and go outside of the range, we would use up all the antioxidant buffering system and then start to oxidize the cells. Really, even if you ended up doing that, the patient might end up peeing out some of those cells like a day later. So they're, you know, with the small amount of blood we're doing, still really safe, but stay within the recommended dosing ranges because it's totally avoidable and very easy. So start patients off at the beginning of the titration schedule, which we have, and then don't use a condemned method, which is the one that I just mentioned. And that is the way to be fail-safe with ozone therapy. It's really that simple. It sounds simple. That's because it is. It's hard to do it wrong. So that's what I would say on the safety of ozone therapy. And then I am going to let Dr. Boonder talk here on compliance, because that I think is what people are more interested in rather than the safety. But I did want to cover that because I do see them going hand in hand to a degree. So Adam, you ready to take over?
I am ready. I do think it's funny though, because you said that it's easy enough for a clown to do it. My wife calls me a clown all the time. So that must be why we were able to actually do it within our clinic. And trust me, I can throw all kinds of bad dad jokes out at you, but a little bit of background on me, just so that you know who I am, where I'm coming from. I'm actually a chiropractor by trade, so I'm not an MD or a DO. I do not claim to be. I'm not an attorney either, so I'm not giving full-on legal advice here. I always recommend any clinic that I work with to have their team available to run anything that I give and information over to them. But I did run and own and operate a regenerative clinic in Kansas City. Did very well. Had a clinic before that for 10 years that I sold. And, you know, my biggest thing in anything that I did within my clinics or implemented when we hired our medical doctor, our nurse practitioners, when we brought in our team was number one, safety. So Micah obviously went through that. I think safety is a major thing. And I would think that any of you that run a practice or are wanting to implement this, if safety is a big thing for you, I would just say type in a Y in that thing next to it, that little comment thing, because safety is probably one of the biggest things. The next is efficacy. And what I think is incredible is everything that Micah went through. I mean, efficacy has been proven time and time again with ozone therapy. Safety has been proven time and time again with ozone therapy. But the big hiccup that keeps coming out of all of this is it legal? Is this something that we can actually do? And so I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go through my my PowerPoint here with you all so that we can get down to it. So, well, I guess we started at the end, which I don't want that. Give me 1 second. I can go to the beginning. There we go. And work for me. Just for reference, there was a time when I was up about to speak to a whole group of about 70 people, went in, and my whole PowerPoint slide had disappeared. That was not fun, but here we go. So ozone therapy, compliance and regulation. Having a clinic, one of the biggest things for me, obviously, was making sure that the clinic stayed open. Yes, I would say probably everybody is sitting there saying, yes, I want to maintain my license. I want to maintain my practice. I want to make sure that they were there. So what is the importance of compliance and regulation? Number one, it is your license on the line. It's not my license on the line. It is your practice that's on the line. You know, if there's this big fear and this kind of over-encompassing umbrella that we constantly are hearing about with the FDA, the FTC, there's also your current board. In Kansas, it was the Board of Healing Arts. Different states have different names for that. But there's a time and a place for each of those. They typically aren't coming in together. But it really comes down to, again, your license, your practice. And for me, the number one thing was the patients, is offering the patients something that was going to get them results that they weren't getting anywhere else. And I would assume that most of you are treating those types of patients. I started our clinic, my wife had chronic Lyme disease. And so that was a huge piece of what we saw within our practice. We helped patients with OA, RA, list goes on, but it was really about giving them an alternative or something that they could do. So the big question, which is the heading of what we're talking about right now today, is ozone therapy legal? So here it is. Ozone therapies are not illegal. And as Micah stated, this is why I love what he said even before this. It's been studied for safety and efficacy for over 150 years. You know, it's less documented fatalities than even aspirin has caused. We know how that obviously affects our body, our gut, and even standard prescribed medications. So very, very safe. But here's the fact. The fact is that it is not illegal. Although the FDA says that ozone is a toxic gas, as Micah alluded to and talks about, and it is stated in their regulations. Ozone therapy is currently being legally practiced in the US and actually most other countries. So I know you're going to ask all legal questions here in a little bit, so let me finish through this whole thing and then we will keep going. So the truth, FDA does not actually make determinations about the legality or illegality of single therapies. So again, it's the therapy that you're applying to a patient. Their scope is regulating drugs, biological products, medical devices. And so the purpose is to make sure that the products and devices don't cause harm, and then obviously not regulating what the doctors do in their practice. There's been a big misconception of what the FDA actually does. It's not about just what the doctors are doing. It's about whether or not what you're doing can cause harm. So we'll talk about some SOPs and some different things, but research is a big thing. One of the things I love about Micah and his organization is, and I think the man has more research in his back pocket than most of us have ever even looked at or read in our whole life. But it's mainly on the efficacy and the safety of ozone therapy. And that's always available to you as well. So I always had that information ready and available. If anything ever came up, if patients were to ask, I didn't necessarily always need that, but it was there. So again, the FDA is not there to determine whether or not what you're doing as a practitioner and what you're giving to somebody is actually regulated by what they have. In fact, the device is more so regulated than anything else. But even then, we kind of get into some different nuances. The truth here is that many FDA-approved substances legally are administered every single day in the US. How many of you do vitamin IV therapy? Yes. Vitamin injections? Yes. Give out supplements within your clinic? Yes. Mm-hmm. We all do that. None of those are FDA approved. So again, homeopathic procedures, products are not FDA approved, and yet they're legally done every single day in the US. I try to help people to conceptualize, we have to change our thinking and how we're actually applying this ozone therapy to our patients. I tell people to look at it just like you were doing a vitamin IV infusion, you know, whether it's a Myers cocktail, high dose vitamin C, you know, an energy infuser, whatever you want to name your vitamin infusions or your injections, think of ozone therapy in that same capacity. So again, the biggest thing that they look for some of the compliance is you cannot promote that therapy specifically to cause a cure, such as cancer, which is a big one, or COVID, or RA, or any of these conditions. So the truth is, it really doesn't have to do about the procedure that you're giving on the side of compliance. It's about how you actually connect an actual procedure to an actual condition. That's what the FDA comes in and looks at, along with the FTC. They're looking at, are these two things being connected? If they are being connected, then they're going to start looking at what you're doing. I call it kind of the front door effect. Anything outside of that front door is what the FDA begins to look at. When they walk through your clinic, that's more of the board that you are actually registered under. So the board that regulates your MD, DO, NP, PA, or RN, that's what's going to be coming in if there's things that are happening inside, obviously causing harm to a patient. The FDA typically doesn't look at things like that. It goes to the board, but if you're marketing and advertising something, from state to state, it depends on how you're saying it. I say across the board in any state, do not tie it. So we don't say ozone therapy is going to help you with your Lyme disease, even though they really don't recognize Lyme disease as an actual disease. But we don't say, obviously, ozone is going to help cure, treat, or prevent your cancer. What we say is, this is going to help modulate the body. We know what the effects are: increase your energy, increase vitality. Those are the specific ways that we actually speak towards these therapies. So this is directly out of section, well, you can see 801.65 from the FDA in their regulatory implies that any device used by a licensed practitioner, including physicians, dentists, optometrists, and their practice is exempt from registration, meaning it's legal to use it. So if we have a device coming from, say, that generates ozone, you're allowed to utilize that device to create a procedure for that specific patient. So what is that procedure that you're doing? It could be an IM injection, it could be a joint injection, it could be an IV injection. So you as the provider get to choose what that procedure is going to be based on the patient's need and the outcome that's actually being requested. So I always go back to, again, you're not allowed to say that we treat specific conditions with IV ozone therapies or joint injections. I'm assuming everybody understands that in the direction that we're going there. Yes, on the side, I don't see any comments. There's only like 3 things in chat. So either everybody has fallen asleep on me so far, or it's not going through perfect. I got it. Yeah.
I think we're just listening. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll chime in there real quick if you want,
Yeah.
Adam. I think the biggest misconception being around the FDA and what they're looking at. The FDA is looking at manufacturers. And so what the FDA does is they look at trends of complaints. So they say, hey, there's a trend of 12 complaints within a 12-month period when the previous year there was 0 complaints. And then they would take and look at that and start to investigate it and make an assessment based on, was this safe? Was it actually ozone therapy? Was it this or that? So I say it from a risk perspective that it's extremely low. If you want to get out of risk, quit practicing, because everything you're doing is assuming some sort of liability when you're working with patients and that kind of thing. And also for the doctors, basically just to recap what you said, Adam, you can take and modify a machine. You can buy that equipment and use it for what you want to use it for. And then from there, if you use it safely, which you will if you use the protocols, but they're going to look for complaints against your board or people complaining against your thing, which you're not going to run into if you're doing it correctly. And by correctly, it's extremely easy to do it correctly.
Yeah. And I'll say, I mean, within the regulation, I do a lot of compliance for clinics that are using regenerative type therapies. And the same thing applies within that. I mean, labs are not allowed to create claims based on something that they're producing. And then they're sold through different distribution channels. So that's a lot of it is the same. There's obviously some vast differences, obviously in biologics, but there's the difference between the FDA from outside, really. And I'll tell you that the safety of introducing ozone into your clinic really is, it isn't even a state by state, because states don't have, I mean, they have regulatory, but there's also, just looking at laws, so the right to choose. Basically, patients have the right to choose the types of therapy. So they will seek out providers that are doing the therapies that they actually want. So you are actually allowed to do that. There's, the Freedom Health Act. So there are even certain states that are allowed to actually do multiple procedures, not just, so like we have, I think it was a chiropractor in Utah that's able to do those injections. Each state's a little bit different. So looking at malpractice, I'm going to get to this in a second. I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I always go to, look at your malpractice insurance. If people want to be safe in what they're doing, make sure that your malpractice is covering the procedures that you're doing. And the truth is, if malpractice will actually cover a therapy, I wouldn't think that it would be illegal to actually do that therapy. And I just tell people, double check the things that we're saying too. Go look online. I put this on here because over the last 30 years, I think, Micah, you said 4 and 30, I guess, cases where they had
it doesn't mean they're licensed.
That's what I was going to say. It doesn't actually mean that those doctors, even in those cases, there's nothing that's actually been shown that licensure has been taken away, that they've done anything wrong, that they've even fully caused harm to a patient. It's just complaints. We know we live in a litigious society, but the truth is when you're doing something that is safe and when you have a protocol, and that's where I really go into this, best practices and anything that you do and implementing anything new, honestly, is it's not just about what you're doing with ozone therapy, because we think about how we actually apply it and what we do. Even though that is important, really what it comes down to overall is what are you claiming? So when you're doing this, again, it's how you speak, how you market, what you're saying to bring people in. You know, I tell people, I think the best clinics are the ones that are not doing this mass marketing, you know, Facebook, all these different things. It's more on the internal side because results bring results, meaning you get a result with the patient, they're going to share that and people are going to come in for that. So we're not claiming cures. We're not claiming treatments. We're not claiming even prevention. We are creating vitality, energy, wellness. We're modulating the immune system. And these are the things that ozone has been proven to actually do. You know, if somebody's chronically ill and sick, what do they look for? They look for energy, vitality. They look for a better immune system. We're able to offer them something for that. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. I developed all kinds of documentation to be able to hand to patients, little simple handouts, but then also your training. You know, I think what it comes down to is that if somebody is knocking on your door saying, hey, you're doing this wrong, you can actually hand them something saying, hey, I've gone through training for this. These are my SOPs. This is what I do. This is how I actually go through. Most people just want to learn the training, but they don't actually go through and write it down. You want to have that actually in your clinic. You want to have it sitting on the table so that if anybody asks, you hand it, hey, here's our procedure. This is how we go through it, our contraindications, and this is what we go by. And these are the most researched therapies in ozone therapy that we utilize here in the clinic. It's, again, Micah said, it's that one. You know, there's 99 they're doing it right, but then there's that one that's going off over here. That's where things start to get fishy. But again, patients coming in, that's going to be towards the board, not necessarily towards the FDA. And then obviously your coverage. I talked about if people are really worried, talk to somebody. We have a contact. She's a broker agent that I worked with that actually covered our insurance. She covers everything from vitamin IVs, ozone therapy, and just general malpractice. So that's really what it comes down to. It's not about whether it's legal or legal or illegal, because it's not illegal to actually practice. Even most states, New York is a big one with freedom to care, freedom rights to actually practice and utilize ozone. Texas is a big one. I mean, every state is able to actually do ozone. It just depends on, again, what are the claims that you're making? So if I haven't emphasized it yet, it's the claims that you're making. That's really what gets people in trouble. So I'm sure we can open up some questions towards that here in just a moment. But that is what we have. Micah.
But yeah, I like what you said on just talk about the benefits of ozone therapy, modulating the immune system, mitigating oxidative stress. I have patients with cancer that do ozone therapy, and they have found it to be helpful. It's wordsmithing and working around in a way that is accurate and helpful to the patient, but not going to get you in trouble. Whereas if I said I am directly treating cancer with this, that's no bueno. So
All
cool.
right.
Discussion time, right?
Yay. Here, let me I'm stop sharing my screen here. Let me see everybody. Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Adam, by the way. I think that was great. And you can dive down into this world on things. I think the big takeaways is the doctor can take equipment, modify its usage, and do.
There was a question up here about when introducing ozone therapy. I think it was Michelle. So what do you do actually, son, what do you actually say to introduce ozone therapy? If this question, I don't know, Michelle, if you can unmute, introduce it like just directly into your practice, or are you introducing it to a patient, or is it kind of both?
Well, in the meantime here, Adam, there was a good question, which was, she said, as a certified ozone technician, is it enough in regards to legalese to start an ozone clinic? So in other words, what certifications are necessary for ozone therapy? What do I need?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I mean, and Micah, you can talk about other organizations, but I really think that when it comes to any board or any regulatory, I guess, board for that matter, they just want to see that you're not just grabbing some sort of generator and then putting it in and doing something, that you actually, from your certification, have actually created like SOPs. And that's where I talk about the SOPs specifically, of what are your best practices? What are the things that you're doing as you're applying it, whether it's for a joint injection, prolotherapy, autoheme, to have some sort of certification that's better than most. So it's good to keep that and have it. I would put it in that exact same booklet that you have all of your SOPs as well. But Micah, going through a course like with Micah and doing training specifically, at least number one, you've gone forward and done something as opposed to absolutely nothing. Any certification, any continuing ed, if you think about continuing education for most practitioners, they're not going through and asking every single one of the things, that you did for that. Some of it's on nutrition, some of it's for, physiology. If you're doing advanced training, in fact, a lot of states actually accept ozone as continuing ed credits, which if it's illegal, why would they be doing that as well? And they do that nationally too.
I have a quick question just because I think, and I'll clarify on that real quick. You need to be a medical practitioner. And if it's IVs, you need to be certified as a medical practitioner and doing something with IVs. So like a nurse can do it with practitioner oversight, just to make that super clear. So as a person, I could go and start a health spa and do an ozone saunas, but I cannot, unless I'm a medical practitioner, do IVs if that's not allowed under my scope. So just wanted to clarify that. But secondly, there's a number of people in the room. So does anybody have like great success stories with ozone therapy? Just really quickly, and then I'll jump back into these questions. I always love to hear them.
Micah, I'll talk.
Hey, yeah, go for it.
You guys, my name is Holly. Been following this group for a number of years now, and I'm actually a nurse. I have my registered nurse license, but I also have like a little clinic in Evergreen, Colorado, where Micah, like you were just saying, I have a nurse practitioner that oversees my care. And I got into ozone therapy because I've been an ER nurse for 13 years. And once I started practicing this medicine, it was like, I felt very duped actually by Western education, because it's like, why wouldn't they teach us this really incredible medicine? And I want, I wish we can have it in all of our local, hospitals and that kind of stuff. But I've treated psoriasis cases that have improved very, very well. I'm happy to send pictures of that. Yeah, I use it in, I offer facials and that kind of stuff with the PRP, and ozone therapy is the best. I think it should be everywhere. If you were to ask me, it should be in every cancer clinic, in every pain clinic, in every, in every sort of clinic, even for rectal insufflation. And, when you go get your bowels cleaned, what is that called? The,
Colonic?
where they, yes, colonics and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, guys.
Awesome. And it's good to see you, Holly. It's been a while.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Mike.
I have a good question here. Does the nurse practitioner or doctor have to be on site for each IV session, or can they approve the therapy and then have an RN do it? Adam, do you have anything on that?
That's going to be state to state. Honestly, different states have different regulatory. That's why I said, having your healthcare attorney on hand. I know some people don't have them, but you can find that stuff on your board director's sites. Most states have their own sites. Again, ours was Kansas State of Healing Arts. So you could actually go in, put in your level of expertise. So RN, LPN, APRN, PA. In the state of Kansas, physician assistants had to have their medical director on site. Specifically, nurse practitioners recently are now autonomous. They can do whatever they want, so they don't have to be on site. So I would just look at, what is your state regulatory, and then you can determine that from there. There are some states where MAs are able to actually do some of these therapies. So again, I am not saying that all MAs can do these therapies. I'm just saying some states have different regulatory to be able to do it.
I have a question on, I'll take this one, but ozone going through water should be breathable. And then another one is breathing ozone bubbled through olive oil safe for the lungs. So you can't bubble it through water and breathe it. There's still ozone in the air. So the point of using like an oil base, you can put the ozone gas through an oil. It uses up all the ozone because it bonds with the carbon chains of the oil. And that creates essentially peroxides that are breathable. I really just recommend starting with a couple things, like get into the IV, start working with that. And then, worry about exploring other things as you go. Personally, yeah, I've used it for like respiratory stuff, and it's an antiseptic, does a lot of the things that ozone does, but it actually changes the properties of it a little bit, but does help. There's also nebulized hydrogen peroxide, which is great. So, and that's a little bit easier for some people. So just to answer that real quick, let's see what else we got. Can an alternative medical practitioner use ozone therapy with his patients? Well, what are the credentials is what I would ask, right?
Same thing. Yeah. Again, state to state. I mean, we have like chiropractors in Utah that can actually do like sub-Q injections. We have some practitioners, naturopaths in Arizona can do surgeries. So it really does depend on where your licensure is. It's kind of the same question as before, but check with your state to see exactly what it is.
I just wanted to comment that the way these medical board cases usually are generated is because of some kind of mistake, some kind of an issue that results in a complaint. Most medical boards do not pay attention to FDA expressly. In other words, just because they have a concern that FDA may not have approved it affirmatively, most medical boards are not going to come in and challenge you for that reason alone. So to be safe legally, what's really important is to have your protocols together, follow up on adverse reactions to make sure they're handled. The only case that I've seen in practice that involved ozone was a case what was resolved when the board decided that was more of an OSHA issue because of the free ozone in the suite around the ozone generator. So they entered in a consent order that as long as the physician put a ozone destructor next to the ozone machine to remove any ozone from the air, they would dismiss the complaint. So I just thought I would share those things as a couple of tips for you.
Perfect. Yeah,
Awesome.
that's helpful.
Thank you.
What other questions?
What is an ozone disruptor that you put beside the machine? Give me an example.
He's talking on a destruct is what it's called, and it's this carbon-based material, has copper and some other stuff in it. But essentially, like if you're running ozone into the room air, you're breathing it, right? So at a certain point, you're going to exceed the OSHA standards. It's totally avoidable. So I don't know how that really happens other than they forget. But yeah, so you flip off your oxygen with each therapy, but we have like this built-in destruct that essentially you toggle between filling a syringe or whatever it is and back to the destruct, so that when it passes through this destruct, the ozone is broken down back into oxygen.
Yeah, I was showing there's some destruct options built into the machine itself in the generator, but then this is also an attachable destruct that you can attach, and it will just convert the excess ozone immediately into oxygen.
Is that separate from SOPMed? We are separate from SOPMed. SOPMed adds in UV. We distribute for each other, essentially. They distribute our ozone equipment. We distribute their UV equipment, and there's some overlap there. So that's kind of how that works out.
There is a question here about mobile IV hydration. I work with some clinics that are concierge, and they take their generators with them to people's houses. So it's pretty simple. The procedure is exactly the same once you get to the house, and the generators are not large at all. So you just have to make sure that you're taking oxygen with you. So that was for the one that was talking about mobile hydration.
Perfect. Is there a non-invasive ozone therapy course available through Doctor's Ozone? Yes, you can do like a 1-hour training session with Christy, or you can go through this course that's all the basic stuff. I think the only thing that's not in there is ozone saunas, but all the non-invasive procedures. The invasive, I'm considering IV because you're sticking a needle, pulling out blood, injections. That's what I'm considering. And then we have courses on that as well. You guys will get free access to it after this. We have saved people's toes from frostbite, diabetic wounds using ozone bagging and hyperbaric oxygen. Awesome. Some success stories in here. Getting a number of those. So cool. Do we have more questions? I mean, I got time. I don't know about you, Adam, but I got some time here. I can take some more questions.
Has anybody used the ozone with stem cells?
Adam has a ton of experience with that.
Do you have a protocol on it?
Yeah, I mean,
have two.
yeah. So depends on how you're going to utilize them. We would always keep our gamma extremely low if we're mixing. There's multiple ways to do it. In fact, if you want to see how he could connect with me, we could actually talk specifically about it. But yeah, I mean, you can mix, you can put it in after, but there's a bunch of different ways, both PRP, obviously with MSCs, with nanoparticles. It just kind of depends on what it is, but it's about setting the concentration the right way and not going too high on it. But yeah, it's just going to depend on what you want to do.
Just to chime in on the reason for that, as I understand it, Adam, you probably know more, but we're basically creating a good platform for the stem cells to take place. So therefore it's making the stem cells more effective by improving microcirculation, mitigating oxidative stress, inducing senescent, like getting rid of senescent cells, inducing autophagy. So it's essentially creating a better platform for the stem cells, and ozone therapy in and of itself being a regenerative therapy, helping with a lot of things. But I know you worked with extensive medical and BD labs, and that was kind of how they fit it into their protocols, was geared around that.
Mm-hmm.
None of those, but I was wondering, where can we get the IV supplies?
Well, the IV supplies are going to range. So, I mean, as far as the base ozone equipment, simply as far as like heparin and saline, that's going to come from your medical provider. So you use your medical license, go through your medical supplier. Saline, heparin, IV catheters, IV line, IV bag, that kind of stuff is all going to come from the medical supplier. So
Also the oxygen tank.
to get these custom made syringes, ozone being a very strong oxidant. If you use a black rubber syringe, it does break down the black rubber, and now you're injecting that into the patient. So I have to get custom made these syringes that have a siliconated body and have a silicone plunger, because those are ozone resistant. That's really the only thing from there. And then,
and I would say, just to point into that specifically, and I've worked with a lot of clinics that want to save a few cents on not using the right syringes when utilizing ozone. I would highly advise, obviously we're doing this to have good results for patients and to create change in their health. So I would definitely go with those syringes, because again, any type of black substance or any sort of rubber, even if you can't see it to the naked eye, we are not wanting to put that into anybody. So might as well do it right. And I mean, even putting that type of information in your SOPs and your procedures, protocols, I think is essential.
yeah, I'm not trying to sell anybody either. I'm just telling you what it is. So I can kind of shamelessly plug it because I understand it. But it's total, I mean,
a lot of clinics just don't care. So
as
I
long
try
as
to
you
make sure
know what you're doing, and you make a decision based on that. But my job is to tell you what it's doing. So from there, you can make a decision. But I appreciate everybody coming today and joining us for this conversation. Been super good. I'm super excited to see everybody here. It feels like we're building a little bit of a community. I want to keep doing these Zoom calls and doing more interaction with people directly. I think it's a lot of fun, is really what it comes down to for me. And I haven't had the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations in the last few years through the phones and different things like that. So this is great. I appreciate you guys, and thanks so much.